Zack is younger, smarter, and better looking than I am. And we know he's smarter because he figured out AI before I did and went to go work at OpenAI while I was still trying to figure out ChatGPT 3.5. And he's already left OpenAI to move on to bigger and better things. So he's a tech veteran, Silicon Valley guy, doing the startup game, has been. And it sounds like he's about to do another one, but he was at OpenAI at a critical moment, helping enterprise partners deploy. He now spends a lot of time advising large companies on how to get it right and avoid the mistakes of implementing and deploying AI. He's the author of a book that's about to be published, The Next Renaissance, AI and Expansion of Human Potential. So Zack, we're probably going to start there this morning, and he lectures at the University of Virginia. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Greg.
Zack, let's, as our audience knows it, or at least if you're a section regular, we like to zoom in and zoom out. We call it high-low. It's one of our operating principles, that section. It's one of the things we teach my executive team. I teach this ability to be able to go high-low at any moment and sort of be able to move between those two altitudes on any issue at any time. So let's go high-low with AI and AI deployment, Zack, today. Let's start high. Let's zoom out. You and I were last talking about this idea of work, human potential, meaning, and the impact of AI on how we make a living, maybe in the medium to long term. So I'd love for you just to riff for a couple of minutes on what's your perspective. You've been in the sort of middle of this for a few years now. You're seeing its impact on workforces. So zoom out for us and give us a little bit of a big picture from your perspective.
Well, okay. So in the spirit of covering as much as possible, as quickly as possible, I'll give my hottest takes, and then we can expand on them. And I'll start. So first, I'll start by saying to everyone, I am an optimist, and I have rose-colored glasses, and so I think in that sense, it's it's very easy to sort of tear down my ideas because optimism is generally less popular than pessimism, and so you won't be the first person to tell me I'm an idiot or wrong. But I have always seen. So I studied history and computer science at Berkeley. That's sort of my prior experience before working in technology. And when you study history, you learn that the world gets better over time, almost consistently, right? There are periods of a few hundred years at various points, especially in sort of you can sort of pick apart. But on the whole, we've been on a trajectory, at least for the last 10,000 or so years, where it's gotten better year over year. And when you study computer science, you learn why. And so you basically figure out that technology does, in fact, make the world a better place. And it is through technology that we are able to scale access to services that allow people to live more fulfilling lives. And part of what happened in the first Renaissance was we finally had enough free time for many people to actually explore what we now consider today hobbies, which were at the time things like arts and sciences that were sort of orthogonal to existence, right? Beautiful art was considered truly a luxury prior to this. Given that, I've since college seen technology as this catalyst for human progress, with the understanding and acknowledgement that it can go wrong and does, and that there are examples of technologies that have catastrophic outcomes. Obviously, the exploration of nuclear power is one of them. And also, we wouldn't unwind them if we could. And this is one of my very controversial takes, that there is really not a technology that you would walk back. And then the question is simply, how do we find the space to explore? So with all that said, my belief is that we are on a very good trajectory now as a human species that will experience a ton of weirdness over the next 10, 50, even 100 years, that for many people will be, incomprehensibly bad. And that it will sort of shock us at our sort of biological core, chemical core, but that in fact puts us on this incredibly bright new trajectory towards a path where every human on Earth has the tools to thrive, not just survive. And we are starting to see glimpses of this. We are starting, India just announced that it had achieved food safety. So no Indian will starve by 2027. And of course you can point at this and point at all the holes in it, but the fact remains that thanks to mass farming and industrial food production, we've created a sort of more abundant food supply for a nation that forever, at least in my life, struggled with food safety to an incredible degree. So I basically believe that we are now on a new trajectory, probably have been since the dawn of electricity, that looks more logarithmic than linear, wherein the expansion of human potential means that at some point, every human will have what they need to thrive, barring sort of geopolitical outlying events, and critically, that we are probably moving towards a future wherein, and this is my hottest take, I guess we'll just throw it out, where humans may not work. That is sort of what I believe at my core, that we are approaching at some limit a place where humans recreate and find joy, as Mo Gadot sort of describes in a new space. And by the way, I believe this also, Greg, not just because I think that humans have sort of convinced ourselves that we need to work in a post-industrial world, but because we've run the experiment enough now. Like we have run so many happiness experiments, so many deathbed experiments, so many blue zone experiments, et cetera, only to discover that the only thing people want more of consistently in their life is time with friends and family and physical community. It turns out that we make money to sustain a life in community, that we are a social creature, and except for the 9% of us who are psychopathic or antisocial, the 91% of the human species operate with the same sort of incentive structure. They want to be around they want to be around their friends and family. And I believe that technology.
And so you think AI will accelerate our ability to do that, is what you're saying, right?
Not only accelerate, and I think actually like enable. I basically don't think that we have been in a world that I don't think we can draw a comparison. Greg, here's a great example, right? You're by any measure an exceptionally successful person. You are right now at a Ritz-Carlton in Dallas because you're successful. Like, we've created a world where success comes at this incredible cost of not being with the people that you love, and that has become this accepted norm. And my position is actually that like the wealth in the future will be measured actually on something entirely different.
Yeah, sure. Not having to go to Dallas, Texas, basically for a day.
I know. I have no issue with Dallas.
No, I get it. So okay, no, I'm with you. I'm with you. I hear you. Let's talk about timeframes. And by the way, my goal is to spend an hour and not use the term AGI. But let's talk about timeframes here. So yeah, because you said in the next like decades to 100 years, right? It would biologically shock us to our core and also liberate us. But let's bring it down to, I don't know, let's do 20 years. Let's use a 20-year time horizon. I should be golfing by then. I'm probably the oldest guy on the Zoom, right? But let's 20 years, Zach, what's going to happen? And let's talk about, because you said to me earlier, we're going to create more jobs. With a lot of confidence, you say we're going to create more jobs than we are going to eliminate jobs. So let's go there let's tighten our focus. 20 years, and let's talk about jobs.
So I think, over the next 10 years, my expectation is we are going to see a jobs supply contraction. That over the next 10 years, two things are going to happen. The first is we are going to over automate things. So I have this longstanding belief that actually there's a limit to all automation. Greg, there are some things in this world that you and I do not want to automate. We could come up with a long list. Some of them are crass and crude. Some of them are, a lot of people like cooking. There lots of physical activities. Sorry, I'll come closer to the mic. Thank you for the feedback. Lots of activities in our lives that we don't want to automate. And then there are a ton of activities in our lives that we do want to automate. And over the next 10 years, we're going to over automate things. This has been my longstanding belief, that we're going to over adopt this technology, and it's going to happen in both the consumer and the enterprise environment. So for example, we are already seeing the rise in the over adoption of AI powered therapy. We can go into that later. And so you're going to see this sort of flood in the market of these tools and technologies that feel like they're replacing humans. And they will in the short term, but the medium term result is actually going to be a big backlash. And this is already happening in some places. And there are tons of examples of this that we can go into. But what's particularly fascinating is seeing this like near-term rise in things like, for example, local concerts and and outdoor activities and event spaces, things that we thought were going away in the COVID era because everyone was so addicted to the screen. And now actually we're seeing this massive resurgence in, right? Broadway is coming back. Hollywood talks about the death of Hollywood, but like people are still going to movies. And
Sure.
so
Well,
all these
if we live in a generated world, right, it'll be nice to spend some of our time in a non-generated world, right?
agreed. So, but I still think over the next 10 years, what's going to happen is we're going to over automate things
So we
to
will
a,
lose jobs. So we will lose jobs. That's code
yeah,
for saying, that's Latin for saying we lose jobs.
I think we will, I think, well, yeah, I think there will be a labor supply constriction over the next
Contraction. Yep.
contraction over the next 10 years. Following that, two things are going to happen probably within the next 10 years. One, it will become a pronounced political issue. And when people ask me what jobs are going to automate first, what jobs are going to go away, what I tell them is show me the weakest cartel or weakest union. And I don't mean cartel in the drug sense. I mean cartel in sort of the control of market sense. There are groups that will not allow for the automation of their work. And we saw this with the dock workers, the longshoremen in October last year. They said you cannot automate the ports, and they went to the negotiating table. They didn't ask for more money, and they didn't ask for safer working conditions. They simply said you can't automate the ports. And so what we're seeing is a world where people are starting to organize and say, don't automate our jobs. So I think that even though we will see some professional services jobs like legal services contract, others will simply not change because they're so heavily regulated. But I do think over the next probably, let's say 10 to 50, two things are going to happen. The first, there's going to be a political response. And the political response is going to do two things, I think. The first, it's going to quickly sprint to protect labor. And it's going to do so acknowledging that it may come at an economic cost, but it's like necessary to what I'm calling the identity displacement crisis. The greatest threat that we face over the next 100 years is actually discovering our purpose and identity in a world where our job automates. The second thing they're going to do is explore UBI. UBI is going to become an issue within the next 20 years in the United States. And then the question is going to be, do we actually need work? So I think what we're going to experience is this terrifying sort of probably decade, maybe two, where there's going to be an imbalance of power, primarily because of special interest policy. Some jobs will get to automate, some jobs won't. Some people will feel left out, some people won't. And the economic value will not distribute as evenly as we would like. But over the long course, what we are going to start to ask ourselves is actually, wouldn't the world be better if the docks were automated? Wouldn't the world be better if hospitals were automated? Wouldn't the world be better if legal services were automated? And we're going to give ourselves space and time to actually ask that question, because the answer probably is yes. Like there are a ton of things in this world that would be way better if everyone had access to them. And that means ultimately automating them. But that is just going to have to take, my guess is at least 20 to 30 years to start to have those conversations.
Okay. So I'm going to stop you there. We have so many ways we could go with this. That leads me to then help us, Zach, understand these technologies, meaning I think all of us have this experience working with AI, whichever is our favorite AI. It's sort of a genius and a clown at the same time, right? Makes these surprising mistakes, hallucinates, gets shit wrong, and then sort of blows us away with its supposed intelligence or at least its ability to make us more productive. So what's going on, and does this matter? Does this get fixed? Like what do we, the Apple comes out with a paper just, last week, right? These reasoning models are a joke, basically, is what the paper said. Yet when I use O3, I'm like, wow, this is pretty amazing. So
you leave it to Apple. Leave it to Apple to blame the science for their bad software.
Yeah, sure. No, I get it. And the timing of the research and the release of it, I get it. But what's your take on this in terms of where are we with these technologies? And are we on this relentless march that they are going to get to some sort of degrees of capability that we can't imagine, whether we call that AGI or superintelligence or whatever the hell it is, and when?
Yeah, okay. So two things. One, I think that there is something that every business owner and sort of entrepreneur on the call should expect, which is there's a limit to the current progress. And sort of if you're an AI maximalist, you shouldn't be holding your breath for super intelligence on the near term, because it's just going to require an exceptional amount of compute to both build and run. And the signaling around it is somewhat performative, somewhat for fundraising purposes. But also, if you're Sam, you want to tell people how good this is getting. so that you don't sound like you're lying to the public. I mean, like a lot of what he's doing now, I think is smart. He's saying this is going to get really good. And I think it's actually better for him at this point to overshoot and overpromise, because at least then people aren't going to say you lied, right? You hid this. Then there's this question of, okay, how good is it going to get, and where is it going to get? And I think there are two things that I would say on this. We are now clearly on somewhat at least of a logarithmic path on the performance improvements. Where it asymptotes, I don't know, but it may not matter if it asymptotes soon. My point is actually GPT 4.5 at this point is sufficiently good and sufficiently inexpensive to do an exceptional amount of economically viable tasks. And one of the things, and people are asking about a playbook, we'll talk about this in a second. One of the things that I'm now sort of encouraging people to do is actually just start to say, what are the ways? Let's assume that GPT 4.5 gets us to a place where it starts to unmeter intelligence, which it has. What are the things that change in your business? Like what are the fundamental things that actually will start to materially change in your business, such that you have to rewire your business, and what are the things that don't? And
so let's go there. Sorry,
go ahead.
Yeah, you go ahead. You go ahead.
But I think what's important at this point is, like, we have seen such an incredible precipitous decline in the cost of the model, and such an incredible improvement in the performance of the model that honestly people did not expect, certainly in the industry. That the trend at this point is that we are going to live in a world of free intelligence, or unmetered intelligence, and that we sort of almost do already. That like, in fact, brilliance is just so much less expensive today than it was 2 years ago, and certainly than it was 5 years ago, and that we are now on this trajectory.
So Zach, I'm about to go talk to a bunch of CHROs, heads of people, Fortune 500 companies, after you and I wrap up this webinar. So let's move to that conversation I'm about to have, and this challenge in general of how do we deploy to the enterprise? Because you've seen this up front and close the last few years. Because my perspective, and confirmed by the research that Section just completed of 5,000 knowledge workers, US, UK, Canada, and frankly, all the conversations I'm having, is AI seems to be stalling inside of organizations. It seems to be, the initial rollout didn't go well. Maybe there's 5, 6, 7%, 10% adoption. A lot of trivial use cases, a lot of complaining about Copilot can't do what I thought it was going to do. Frankly, when we survey organizations, what we often find is unsanctioned use of GPT is higher, because we do anonymous employee surveys with our clients to benchmark their, kind of their readiness for AI. And what we find in those surveys, because they're anonymous, is employees are reporting higher unsanctioned use of GPT than the sanctioned use, let's say, of Microsoft Copilot. So a lot in there, but what's going on? Let's do that first. Why are these deployments stalling? And then let's get to what we need to do. What is the playbook to get higher levels of adoption and therefore productivity?
All right. So I have a hot take, and then which I'll just say, I don't know that they are necessarily stalling. I think what we have done is we have set such incredible expectations so quickly for the ways in which this technology, in part because of marketing, quite frankly, and in part because of the spend, that we are just sort of not living up to the initial expectations of what this technology was supposed to do. And also something way more insidious and it's sort of problematic is happening, which is that if you, and I'm sure you've done this similar research, but research that we've seen, or that I've seen, says that 80% or close to 90% of leaders think that they have a great AI strategy, compared to 40% of their employees. That gulf represents the problem, which is that there are people sitting around a table sort of patting themselves on the back saying we're doing great, and then a bunch of people actually forced to execute this that feel like they're not doing well. And increasingly what we're seeing, and especially I think largely driven by the uncertainty that AI presents, 25% of all employees surveyed anonymously in a recent survey that I saw claim to actively sabotage their company's AI initiative.
That was the writer.ai research. Yeah, no,
That's
yeah,
right.
absolutely.
And I was like, wow. And sabotage is a loaded word. So sabotage included like not using the tools that you were told to use, using them
Right.
improperly, or using unsanctioned, sort of, but
Yeah,
like
yeah, they were,
active.
yeah, right. They weren't torching Waymos, but they were at least dragging their heels, right?
And so I think it's also likely that like we are underreporting the efficacy of this technology because people frankly don't want to tell their boss that they've outsourced a lot of their work. And I will tell you, something really remarkable is happening that I think speaks to this problem right now, which is when you dig into the cursor and the windsurf and the copilot data, what you discover is really fascinating.
The coding co-pilots. Yeah,
Coding copilot data.
yeah, yeah.
Engineers are writing the same amount of code. They're just now working like 20 hours a week. And I say this, acknowledging that not every engineer is working 20 hours a week, but a lot of engineers are working a lot less.
Oh,
And what is
so hold on a sec. I'm just trying to get the numbers right. Where they were working 20 hours a week before, and now they're working even
no,
less.
they were no, sorry. I
So
think
they're
now
working. They were, yeah. They
they're
were
working
working
much
40
less.
hours, and now they're down. Yeah, 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 yeah. I want to be an
So
engineer.
basically, they're shipping the same amount of code.
Right.
So the productivity is sort of being captured. Uh, the value is sort of being captured in the
By
data.
the employee, by the
Yeah.
by the consumer, which it would not you might suggest that's not a bad thing. As a CEO,
I,
I don't like
I
the
have
sound
no
of it.
issue. I have no issue with that on a fundamental basis. Of course, it's not going to last for long with the CFO. But I bring this all up to say I think we're in the midst of a very complicated experiment because the incentives are not aligned. And this
Yeah.
brings me to the core point, which is it is we are now facing a world where for most of the sort of post-industrial American enterprise, you wanted your business to grow because it meant that you could grow and hire more people. And as you hired more people, you got paid more and they could hire more people and they got paid more. And that was the American enterprise, the IBM, sort of the classic IBM, right? And growing up, I had friends whose parents were sort of the classic American enterprise corporate middle manager, upper middle manager. And every year they got a bonus and they made a little bit more money and got paid a little bit more. What's really fascinating now is that model just doesn't make sense. And slowly and suddenly people are starting to figure it out. And that is, I think, the problem with the experiment on sort of this like qualitative feedback on AI, which is it has too much buried in it. It's like
Mhm.
it's too loaded for
Right.
people to
Right. It's
actually
too
honestly
nuanced, or too, yeah, yeah, too layered.
because
Yeah, yeah.
because they're not actually reaping. Employees, I think, are gonna now hot take alert, and people are gonna lambast me. I do believe at the limit that we all are exceptionally economically benefited by automating most. Like who benefits if we automate the ports, right? We all do economically, right? The longshoremen are stopping us all from having a much more streamlined shipping
Supply chain. Yeah, yeah,
supply
sure. Yep.
for their own benefit. But in the short term, it's going to feel very hard to say, oh, this is good for everyone. I'm okay that my job's being automated. And why I think what we're seeing now and what you're going to talk to the CHROs today about is the fact that the incentive alignment is broken and there's not really an obvious solution. Like, you can on a case by case basis, you can say to someone, "Oh, you're really skilled. You can do this other job," or "Oh, we're going to give you bonuses if the company does well." But that's not. There's no rule to actually solve what happens now when someone's job automates as a result of AI, and they're sort of left being like, "Oh, I was successful in helping the company automate my work, and now I don't have a job."
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's going to suck for a lot of people, at least in that short term, right? I mean, Reid Hoffman said to me, I thought was the understatement of the year so far, at least for section event, which is, the transitions are hard. Well, no shit when you lose your job, right? The transitions are hard.
Yeah,
You know,
it's very hard when a billionaire. That's
yeah, when they got a go bag and a jet and a place in New Zealand. Yeah. So listen, but let's get to the playbook, because it feels like this is a revolution that started with consumers and small business, because that's where a lot of these things always start, because it's easier, right? We don't have the risk, we don't have the size of organizations. It's easier for us to be a little more transparent, maybe with ourselves and even our teams, but it's much harder in larger organizations. So I want to put you on the spot here. Let's start to lay out this playbook
yeah.
for a leader of a mid-sized company or a larger company, or a leader of a team, a CMO inside of an org, or a CRO inside of a company. How do we bridge that gap you talked about. I think I've got a strategy and my employees don't think I do. What should I be saying? What is my talk track? And then what are the 3 to 5 steps you want that leader to take to, to affect this transformation, or at least get it started, in the right direction. So
Okay,
like, give us some advice here.
So I think the first thing that I think a lot of companies are missing right now is why. And this is such a, it's a Simon Sinek. Is Daniel Pink or Simon Sinek? Start with why.
Cynic.
Sinek. But it's true. Like, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Why are you automating this thing? Like, what is the purpose of automating this thing? And reducing AI to automation is actually, by the way, sort of this shorthand for me that makes it easy for people to understand what AI is for, because it really is at the limit sort of automating everything. And in the Wall-E world, it depicts a world where everything has been automated effectively. But I sort of basically ask CEOs, what is the purpose of automating this thing? And the extent to which you can articulate that is the extent to which you have, like, now a backbone of a strategy, versus simply saying we should automate this thing because it costs us a lot, or we should automate this thing because it's a huge annoyance. And one of the most important whys that I have discovered in my journeys is access to a good or service. Because one of the things that every company in the world feels like they do not have enough of, or cannot provide enough of, is access to their good or service. This is like one of these, scarcity, one of these great issues. It also happens to be an issue that everyone can rally behind. And one of my great lessons learned from Morgan Stanley, which we'll talk about and I'll sort of bring to bear here, is Andy Saperstein, the president of Morgan Stanley, started with the question, how do we make our wealth managers 50% more productive? And the reason he asked this question, which was so smart, I mean, he's a very, very smart, good leader, was because he saw a world where twice as many Americans ought to have, 3 times as many Americans, frankly, ought to have wealth management. I mean, maybe more arguably, but a tremendous number of people don't have the wealth advice that they ought to have given their money. And the only way to do it was, until recently, scaling headcount. And in order for him to scale 40,000 wealth managers to, let's say 100,000 or 150,000, he was going to have to compromise quality. And he's like, well, that doesn't work. So, okay, so how do we take the group we have and make them more productive? How do we help them manage a bigger book so that they can provide wealth management services to more people? That is an issue that everyone can rally behind, and it solves a bunch of problems. And some of them we'll talk about in a second, Greg, especially regarding regulation. But principally, it's something that his shareholders can agree on. It's something his employees can agree on. It's something his customers can agree on. Everyone says this is a good thing to do.
So step one is the right why, the right mission or vision for the change in the first place.
That's and my argument is always going to be
access.
Not my always, but I would challenge most people to think about automating for the purposes of access, as just given that we have an hour and we need sound bites. Access. When in doubt, think about it, scaling access.
Okay, what's next? And I'll give you a couple prompts. Getting tactical here. Does my CTO or technologist own this, or does a business leader own this? And by this I mean not procure the AI, but really affect the change. I don't think this is a technology challenge. It's more of a people change management culture challenge. Who leads this effort now to get people finding their use cases and using their AI every day?
Well, the answer is yes. I think the problem. Okay, one of the problems that I've seen. Here's another hot take for soundbite. Please don't hire a chief AI officer, and it's not because the chief AI officers are not qualified, the ones on the market. It's because you're asking someone to come in from outside your company and affect more change than has ever been affected in your company, and they're gonna fail.
How about a chief AI officer from within? You don't like the position, or you don't like the fact it's an outsider who doesn't know the org?
Maybe a little bit of both. My principal issue is that this is like saying we should hire a chief internet officer, right? Like there are some of these technologies, or a chief, energy officer. There, unless you're an energy company, right? There's some of these functions that actually become so threaded that siloing them in and of itself defeats the purpose.
How about an AI? But how do you catalyze the change? How do you get this AI Tiger team, SWAT team? Someone's got to
Well,
kick this off.
well, okay. So again, I think that like you catalyze the change in the way that you. This speaks to a broader playbook issue, which is: are we talking to a large enterprise? Are we talking to a mid market? Are we talking to an SMB? Because SMBs are actually well designed for this moment. This is my
Sure.
core thesis too, which is that while they don't have the resources that they think they need, they're specifically designed for sort of like iteration and exploration in ways that enterprises are not. Enterprises have to rally a tiger team and do all these SWAT work and like it takes memos and memos and memos and then meetings on the memos in order to actually do it. I do think that enterprises creating things like AI task force work really well to organize everyone. And it should be internal people whose full-time job is not necessarily the AI task force, but can be in some cases. But ultimately, it has to be a CEO-driven mandate, and it has to work through channels. And what I'm seeing is folks like Jeff McMillan, who is now the chief AI officer at Morgan Stanley, came from what was the chief data officer at Wealth and is now doing for all of Morgan Stanley what he did for Wealth and has built an AI task force that basically serves as an internal solutions team. And it works quite well. And I think that is a very good playbook for most large enterprises. Take the person who can catalyze change and has a good eye for internal solutions talent to own these things.
And Zach, do you think, let's say that team's up and running, and there's maybe a leader internal, and it might be an interim step, right? Maybe you have a head of AI for a year or two, and maybe that position goes away as you said, it gets more threaded. What's the right metrics for that team, or what are the right metrics for AI right now? Is it weekly active users? Like, is it an adoption metric? Is it some sort of, time study to show time savings? Is it internal surveys and employees say, hi, I'm more productive and now I can walk the dog and take an extra yoga class? Like, how do we build the beginnings of a business case to justify that these things are worth spending money on?
Well, again, I go back to the why. If you want to roll out AI so that your employees are happier, that's a very noble thing to do, and I think you could do that. And then your success metric is: are my employees working less? I mean, I'm eager to see a company do this. I would sort of, I could see Patagonia or some one of these like sort of historically, right side of history companies sort of doing something like this, where we want our employees to work a lot less. My belief here is, again, if you're talking about access, the key metric is: are we scaling access? Do we have more customers at lower cost? And we're providing a service or goods and service to more customers. And if your North Star is access, then your KPI is really simple, right? And in Morgan Stanley's case, it was, and honestly, in many companies' cases, access is a very easy thing to track. If it's a cost reduction thing, it's very simple. It's also easier, but then also to your point, and again, these are soundbitey, but if it's a tactical rollout of AI, my argument is this is where it gets really tricky. Sitting around with a CFO trying to measure the efficacy of every AI implementation is in and of itself a waste of time. Like, I'm almost of the mind that you should just make that a grassroots effort. If you can't think to measure it in a really interesting, simple, quantitative way, let people use Copilot or ChatGPT teams or enterprise. Like, the idea that everything needs to be tracked infinitely is also just somewhat tiresome and annoying to me. And one of the reasons, quite frankly, that I think so many employees are sort of internally, whether they realize or not, revolting against this whole thing, because it's starting to feel like efficiency is the only thing that matters. And the limit to this is the end of their job. And that's terrifying.
Yep. Do you recommend to clients today that one of their first moves should be everyone inside the org, whether it be 100 people or maybe 5 or 10,000 or bigger? Should everyone get a high quality LLM and get training and get encouragement to use it? Like, in your mind, is that one of the foundational moves in the playbook, which is everybody should get GPT for Enterprise or Copilot or Gemini Pro? Like, what is that to you a base case kind of for deployment?
One of the things that we said very early at OpenAI that I think is still true, that is coming to bear, is that companies were going to overestimate the effectiveness of their sort of in the early days, their moonshot deployments with the OpenAI APIs. That they were gonna, some people have done really well with them, but many have not. And that we were gonna see instead actual like marginal but material improvement in employee productivity as a result of things like ChatGPT, Teams, and Enterprise. And that has come to be, right? Like that has definitely come to pass. And we're seeing a world where employees who use these AI products are becoming more productive, especially in very, word intensive knowledge work. It's not to say that it is a rule. I don't think that every company should, like there are mining companies that don't
Sure.
need to give every employee ChatGPT Enterprise. But there are plenty of knowledge work companies. And in fact, I just spoke to one of the top 3 biggest law firms in the world who is building their own internal solution and is now, and this is amazing, offering the solution to clients.
Mm-hmm.
And what they're saying is, instead of calling your attorney, use this first. They are basically offering a subscription service to their traditionally per hour legal services.
Yep.
And so they're trying to extend the productivity past the internal wall to the client itself.
Yeah. 1 or 2 pieces of advice for a leader. I'm the GM, or again, I'm a functional leader or a CEO. Again, let's assume mid-sized company, mid-sized team. 1 or 2 pieces of advice next 6 months. What should I be doing?
I guess my first piece. Well, maybe could I hate to ask for a little more context, but could we get a little more?
You're at a loss for words all of a sudden. Wait, come on.
Well, yeah.
Why? More context. So I want the change. So let's say I've rolled out the LLM. I've seen some sporadic, uptake, but I don't want to be Toby Lutke from Shopify getting frustrated, or maybe I do. The mandate, right? Hey, we're going to drop the hammer. It's going to be in performance reviews. You can't ask for human headcount until you can prove the AI can't do it. I guess that's one version of affecting, catalyzing the change. Give me a couple other options as a leader.
So I will say, I don't think that what Toby has done is very fascinating. And obviously, Toby's a very unique CEO, and I think he ranks in the top 3 CEOs in the world, quite honestly. What he's done is basically said to employees, he's scared employees into reflexively using AI. It is it's sort of a jarring way, but an effective way to actually convince people to reflexively use this. And he is creating space where the savants can thrive, which is sort of one of the really interesting things to do here, which is actually giving people, by like forcing people to reflexively use AI, what you're also doing is giving people permission to do a lot more other things. And so one of the ways that I think you can inspire people to adopt this technology more is by actually challenging them to do the things that they wish they could be doing instead, and to actually try to explore the limits of their job. And every employee, not every, many employees will say, if only the company gave me more reign and more opportunity to do these things, I would fix this thing.
What Zack just said, I think, is a real unlock. And that's the first I've heard it said so well and succinctly when you talk to employees. What can't you do in your job that you want to do? How do you expand your scope and responsibility and your impact with AI, not just the other side of that, which is automate away what I'm doing. We talk about outsourcing grunt work to AI. We talk about all that, but I think what Zack just said is really important. Thank you, Zack. Great session. Please come back. We'll invite you back.
Thanks, everyone.